Daniel Carter slammed his suitcase against the wall, so hard the hallway mirror shook. 3 days. 3 days away, and something in his gut told him something was wrong the second his headlights hit the driveway. Then he saw her, Madison, his neighbor, standing in the dark in her robe, arms crossed, eyes steady. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just walked straight up to him and whispered 4 words that stopped his heart cold. "You won't sleep tonight." And she was right, but not for the reason he feared. Drop comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You will not want to miss what happens next. The drive back from Columbus had taken longer than it should have. Road construction on Route 30 added 40 minutes Daniel didn't have. His back ached from 3 nights on a hotel mattress that felt like it was stuffed with gravel. His eyes burned. His phone had died somewhere around Mansfield, and he hadn't bothered to plug it in because, honestly, he just needed the silence. 3 days away from home. 3 days away from Emma. He told himself it was fine. He told himself she was fine. Mrs. Donnelly from down the street had agreed to check in on her twice a day. Emma was 8 years old, smart, responsible, and tough, in the way that only kids who've had to grow up a little too fast become tough. She knew the rules. Lock the door. Don't open it for strangers. Call Dad if anything feels wrong. She hadn't called. So Daniel told himself everything was fine. He turned onto Maplewood Drive just past midnight. The neighborhood was dark and quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes when every honest person has already gone to bed. Porch lights glowed here and there. A dog barked once somewhere down the block and then went silent. Daniel pulled into his driveway and cut the engine. He sat there for a second. Just 1 second. Hands still on the wheel, eyes closed, breathing in the smell of his own car coffee stains and old receipts, and the faint ghost of Emma's strawberry shampoo from the last time she'd ridden shotgun. Home, he thought. Finally. He grabbed his bag from the back seat, walked up the front path, and reached for his keys. That's when he noticed the hallway light. It was on. Not the porch light, he'd left that on a timer. Not the small lamp in the living room, he'd left that on too, because coming home to a completely dark house felt like arriving at a funeral. But the hallway light, the one at the top of the stairs, that one had no timer. That one didn't just turn itself on. Daniel stopped walking. He stood on his front step and stared at the thin strip of yellow light bleeding out from under his front door. Emma was supposed to be asleep by 9. His hand tightened around his keys, and then he heard her voice. "Mr. Carter." He spun around. Madison Brooks was standing at the edge of his front path, maybe 10 feet away, half in shadow. She was wearing a dark green robe over pajamas, her hair down around her shoulders. She'd clearly been awake. Or maybe she hadn't slept at all. He hadn't spoken to Madison in what? 2 weeks? 3? They were friendly, the way neighbors are when they share a fence line and wave from driveways, but they weren't close. She was quiet, private. She ran the bakery over on Chester Avenue that everyone in town loved, and nobody really thought much about the woman behind the counter. He'd always thought she had kind eyes. Right now, those kind eyes were serious in a way that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "Madison," he said. "Hey, it's late. What are you?" She walked toward him. Not fast. Not slow, just deliberate, like a woman who had already decided exactly what she was going to say and was not going to let the moment slip away before she said it. She stopped 2 feet in front of him, and she said, quietly, barely above a whisper, "You won't sleep tonight." Daniel stared at her. His brain ran through 20 possibilities in about 3 seconds. Emma was hurt. Someone had broken in. There was a fire. A gas leak. Emma had what happened? His voice came out lower than he intended. Tighter. "Madison, what happened? Is Emma okay?" "Emma is fine," Madison said. And she said it clearly, the kind of clear that was meant to stop panic, not feed it. "She's asleep. She's been asleep for 2 hours. She is perfectly fine." "Then why?" "Because we need to talk." She looked at his front door, then back at him. "And because what's inside that house is going to ask you questions you're not ready to answer yet. And I thought you deserved a minute out here first." He didn't move. "Madison Daniel." She said his name like she'd been saving it. "I'm not here to scare you. I'm here because I was the only one paying attention. And I know how that sounds. I know you don't really know me, but you're going to want to hear what I have to say before you walk through that door." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he set his bag down on the front step. And he said, "Okay, talk." She talked. And he listened. And the more she said, the more Daniel Carter felt the ground shifting under his feet, not violently, not like an earthquake, but like the slow and undeniable drift of a man realizing that the version of his life he thought he'd been living was not quite the version that actually existed. "It started 2 nights ago," she said. "Tuesday night. Around 9:30. She had been up late in her kitchen. She was always up late," she said, without elaboration, testing a new bread recipe. Radio playing low. The kind of ordinary quiet night she'd built her whole life around. And then she heard knocking. Not at her front door. At her side door. The one that faced the narrow strip of yard between their 2 houses. She opened it and found Emma. Emma Carter, barefoot on the back step, wearing pajamas with little yellow stars on them, her dark hair loose and tangled, her cheeks wet. Crying, not screaming, not panicking. Just crying. The quiet kind. The kind that's been going on for a while already. Madison had crouched right down to Emma's level, taken her by the shoulders, and said, "Sweetheart, what's wrong? What happened?" And Emma, 8 years old, tough as she was, looked up at Madison, with those big brown eyes that were an exact copy of her father's, and said, "I had a bad dream, and I didn't have anyone to wake up." Daniel stopped breathing for a second. He made himself breathe again. "She came to you," he said. "She came to me," Madison said. "I don't know if she knew she was going to. I think she needed somewhere to go. And I was the closest somewhere." He nodded. He didn't trust his voice. "I brought her inside," Madison continued. "I made her hot chocolate, real hot chocolate, not the packet kind, and I sat with her at my kitchen table, and I let her talk. And she talked for a long time." "About what?" Madison looked at him carefully. Not with pity, he would have hated pity. With something else. Something more like respect. "About you," she said. "Mostly about you." He said nothing. "She talked about how you work all the time. About how you smile when you're tired so she won't worry. About how you burned dinner 3 times last month and laughed it off every time, even though she could tell you were upset with yourself. About how you haven't had a single friend over to the house in more than a year." Daniel looked down at his shoes. "She's 8, he said. "She's 8, Madison agreed. "And she notices everything. That's what kids do, Daniel. Especially kids who are paying attention because they're worried about the people they love." He pressed his lips together. "She said something that..." Madison stopped. Started again. "She said something that I haven't been able to stop thinking about since." She said, "Everyone thinks my dad is strong, but I think he gets lonely too. And I don't know how to help him." The words landed like a weight on his chest. "I don't know how to help him." His daughter, his 8-year-old daughter, who was supposed to be thinking about school and friends, and what color to paint her bedroom. She was lying awake at night, trying to figure out how to help him. "I didn't know," he said. "It came out raw. I didn't know she was. I thought I was protecting her." "I know," Madison said, quietly, kindly. "I know you did." He let himself into the house. He stood in the hallway and looked around at the home he'd been carrying on his back for 3 years. Since Sarah left, since the divorce that nobody talked about in polite company. Since the day he'd sat Emma down and tried to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. He'd kept the house. That had felt important. Stability. Roots. Emma deserved roots. He'd kept his job. Both of them the logistics manager position at Hartfield & Associates, and the freelance consulting work he did on weekends, on late nights, on early mornings before Emma woke up. He'd kept them, because the mortgage didn't care about his feelings, and neither did the electric bill. He'd kept everything running. He'd kept everything running, and he had genuinely, honestly thought that that was enough. That keeping everything running was the same as giving Emma a good life. Now he stood in his hallway and looked at the space where his daughter's backpack sat by the stairs and the light coming from the kitchen. And he thought about a little girl in yellow star pajamas, knocking on a neighbor's door because she had a bad dream and didn't have anyone to wake up. He walked into the kitchen, and he stopped. The refrigerator had a note on it, a yellow post-it, written in handwriting he didn't recognize. Lasagna on shelf 2. Soup in the blue container. Banana bread in the cabinet above the stove. Heat the soup on low. He opened the refrigerator. He stood there for a full 10 seconds, staring. There was a glass dish of lasagna, covered in foil, with a smaller post-it stuck to it that said 30 min at 350 degrees. There was a blue Tupperware container, labeled chicken soup in black marker. There was a container of what looked like macaroni and cheese, homemade, not the box kind. There was a container of cut fruit. There was a small sealed bag of what he recognized, from the corner of some other life, as shortbread cookies. He closed the refrigerator. He stood in the middle of his kitchen and pressed the heels of both hands against his eyes. He didn't cry. He wasn't going to cry. But something in him, some locked, tight, long silent thing in his chest, shifted. Like a door that had been stuck for years, finally unsealing just a crack. He went upstairs. He pushed open Emma's bedroom door very gently and stood in the doorway. She was asleep on her side, one arm around the stuffed elephant she'd had since she was 3. Her breathing was slow and even. Her hair was loose on the pillow. She looked so small. She looked so peaceful. She had no idea, in that moment, what she had done to him. What she had cracked open just by telling an honest truth to a woman she barely knew. I think he gets lonely too. Daniel stood there for probably 2 minutes. He didn't move. He just watched his daughter breathe and felt something happen to him that he wasn't going to be able to explain to anyone for a very long time. Then he stepped back and pulled the door, almost closed, and he went back downstairs. Madison was still outside. He found her sitting on his front step, arms folded in her lap, looking out at the empty street. She looked up when she heard the door open, and she started to stand. "Don't," Daniel said. "Don't get up." He sat down next to her on the step. They were both quiet for a moment. "Her room is clean," he said. "We did that together. She wanted to. She said she wanted things to be nice when you came home." He nodded. "The food I was baking anyway," Madison said. "It was no trouble." He looked at her. "Madison, you spent 2 days." "It was fine," she said again. Firm. Quiet. Closing that door gently but clearly. He understood. He was fluent in that particular kind of deflection. He'd been speaking it himself for 3 years. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure. Why, you don't know us." "Not really. You didn't have to take her in or do any of this. You could have just called Mrs. Donnelly. You could have just—" "I could have," Madison said. She looked back out at the street. "But she knocked on my door. Not Mrs. Donnelly's. Mine. And that felt like, I don't know. It felt like something I wasn't supposed to ignore." He thought about that. "She trusts you," he said. "I think she just needed someone to trust," Madison said. "I happened to be the one who answered." There was a pause. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck and looked up at the dark sky over Maplewood Drive. Clear night. A few stars visible through the suburban light pollution. Not many, but some. "I didn't know she was that she was watching me that closely," he said. "I thought I was doing a better job of hiding it." "Hiding what?" He hesitated. And then, because it was midnight and he was exhausted, and because there was something about Madison Brooks that made the usual armors feel unnecessary, he said, "The part where I'm not actually handling it. The part where I wake up at 3 in the morning and just stare at the ceiling. The part where I burn dinner and I don't laugh it off, not really. Not on the inside." Madison didn't say anything right away. Then she said that part. "Yeah. Daniel," she said, "you're raising a daughter alone, working 2 jobs, keeping a house, keeping every promise you've ever made to that little girl up there. You're not failing. You're carrying something that most people would have put down already." He shook his head. "I'm not flattering you," she said, a touch of sharpness in her voice. "Not unkind. Just don't do that. I'm saying what I see. And what I see from next door every single day is a man who shows up. Every day. Even when he doesn't have anything left to show up with." He looked at her. She was looking back at him. Steady. Unafraid. He'd looked at Madison Brooks 100 times over the years, a wave from the driveway, a nod over the fence, a quick hello on the way to the mailbox, and he wasn't sure he'd ever actually looked at her before. She looked, he thought. She looked like someone who knew exactly what she was doing, and exactly what it cost, and did it anyway. "You're going to want to go inside," she said. "It's late. She's going to be up by 6. "I know," he said. But he didn't move. "Daniel, I know." He stood up, picked up his bag, reached for the door, paused. "Madison." She looked up at him. "Thank you," he said. "I mean that. Not as a neighborly courtesy. Actually." She nodded. "Get some sleep," she said. He went inside. He did not sleep. Not that night. Not for a long time. He sat at the kitchen table in the quiet of the house, and he ate cold lasagna that was somehow the best thing he'd ever tasted. And he taught, "I dare you," and thought about what his daughter had said to a woman she barely knew in the middle of the night in a stranger's kitchen. I think he gets lonely too. He thought about the 3 years since Sarah walked out, and how he had constructed carefully, deliberately, brick by brick, a version of himself that didn't need anything from anyone. A version that was strong enough, and capable enough, and present enough that nobody would ever look at his daughter and feel sorry for her. A version that had forgotten something. He wasn't sure yet what it had forgotten. But, sitting there in the kitchen at 1 in the morning, in a house full of someone else's food, and someone else's quiet kindness, he was beginning to think that maybe the forgetting had been the most expensive thing he'd ever done. He was still sitting there when the first pale gray light of morning started coming through the window above the sink. He heard faintly, from upstairs, the soft creak of a bedroom floor. Small feet, coming toward the stairs. He stood up, and before Emma even made it to the bottom step, he was already there, waiting. She saw him, and her whole face broke open, not with surprise, not with drama, just with the simple, unspeakable relief of a kid who sees their parent after being alone and realizes that the person they love most in the world has come back. She didn't run. She walked the last few steps carefully, the way kids do when they're trying to hold on to something they don't want to drop. And she walked straight into him and put her arms around his waist and pressed her face against his shirt. He put both arms around her and held on. "Hey, Bug," he said, into the top of her head. His voice was steady. He made it steady. "I'm home." "I know," she said into his shirt. "I heard you come in last night. I was going to come downstairs, but Madison said you might need a minute." He laughed. A short, real, unguarded laugh, the kind he hadn't heard come out of himself in a while. "She told you that?" She said, "Sometimes dads just need to sit in the kitchen and think." She said it was the dad version of what I do and don't want anyone to see. He pulled back just enough to look at her face. "What do you do?" he asked. Emma thought about it. "I go sit in the closet," she said seriously, "with a flashlight." "The closet? It's private," she said. "And it smells like my sweaters." He stared at her for a second. And then he laughed again, longer this time, deeper, from somewhere down in his chest that had been locked for 3 years. And Emma, clearly pleased with this reaction, laughed too, and the sound of it filled the kitchen, like something being poured into a container that hadn't known it was empty. "Are you hungry?" she said, pulling away, already businesslike. Already moving toward the refrigerator with the authority of a small person who has thought about this moment. "Because Madison made lasagna, and I'm not supposed to have it for breakfast, but I think it's an emergency." "I already ate some," he said. She stopped, turned, stared at him with what appeared to be genuine moral outrage. "You ate it cold?" "It was still good, Dad." She put both hands on the refrigerator handle and looked at him like a judge delivering a sentence. "That is not how we do things." He pressed his lips together to keep from laughing again. "No, no," she said with absolute conviction. "Madison says everything tastes better warm. And she is correct." She pulled the dish out. "Sit down. I'll heat it up." He sat down. And he watched his daughter, 8 years old, hair still wild from sleep, wearing yellow star pajamas, carefully carry Madison's lasagna across the kitchen and place it in the oven with the focus of a surgeon. She set the timer. She got out 2 plates. She poured 2 glasses of orange juice, one for him and one for herself, and placed them on the table with great ceremony. Then she sat down across from him and folded her hands and looked at him. "I'm glad you're home," she said. "Me too, Bug," he said. She nodded. Matter of fact. Case closed. "But before the oven timer went off," she said quietly, looking down at her orange juice glass, "Dad? Yeah. Are you okay, like really okay? Not just the kind you say when you don't want me to worry." He looked at his daughter, and he thought but all the times he'd given her the other kind. The surface kind. The kind built to protect rather than to connect. "Not entirely," he said. "But I think I'm getting there." She looked up at him. "Okay," she said. "Just that. Okay. Not scared, not worried. Just seen. And seeing." The oven timer rang. She got up to get the lasagna. And Daniel Carter sat at his kitchen table in the morning light, in a house that smelled like bread and coffee and something almost like grace. And for the first time in 3 years, he didn't feel like he was holding his breath. He felt, faintly, almost cautiously, like he was starting to breathe. He didn't know yet that what Madison had whispered to him on that front step wasn't just about the night ahead. It was about everything that had been building, quietly and invisibly, on both sides of that shared fence. And there was still one thing she hadn't told him. The thing she'd found in his mailbox. The thing that was going to change everything. He didn't sleep. Not even close. Daniel sat at that kitchen table long after Emma went back upstairs, long after the lasagna was gone and the orange juice glasses were rinsed and sitting in the drying rack. He sat there with his hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had gone cold twice, staring at nothing, listening to the house breathe around him. 3 years. He'd been doing this for 3 years, and he'd been so sure, so absolutely certain, that he was doing it right. That the right way to protect Emma was to show her nothing broke. That the right way to be a father was to be a wall. Solid. Unmovable. The kind of thing you could lean on and never worry about it falling down. He hadn't considered, not once, that walls don't reach back. He heard Emma's alarm go off upstairs at 6:15. Heard her move around. Heard the small sounds of a morning routine she'd built for herself, because he'd asked her to be independent, and she'd taken that seriously in the way that kids take everything seriously when they're doing it for someone they love. He heard the bathroom faucet run. Heard the drawer in her room open and close. He poured the cold coffee down the sink and started a fresh pot. By the time Emma came downstairs, hair brushed, backpack on, she found him standing at the counter making toast, and she stopped in the kitchen doorway, like she wasn't quite sure if she should believe what she was seeing. "You're making breakfast," she said. "I'm making an attempt at breakfast," he said. "There's a difference." She studied him for a second, with those dark eyes of hers, the ones that saw too much. Then she came into the kitchen and sat down at the table and said, "Can I have the banana bread instead?" Madison left it. "Banana bread it is," he said. He cut her a slice. Cut one for himself. Put them on plates and sat down across from her. They ate without talking for a while, which was something he hadn't realized. He'd missed the comfortable silence of a morning with another person, the kind of quiet that isn't empty but full. Emma finished her bread, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand in the way he'd tried and failed to break her of since she was 4, and looked at him. "Are you going to thank Madison?" she asked. "I already did," he said. "Last night. For real thank her? Or neighbor thank her?" He looked at her. "What's the difference? Neighbor thank her is when you wave and say appreciate it and go inside," Emma said, with the calm authority of someone who had been observing adults for 8 years and found them mostly predictable. "For real thank her is when you actually talk to her. Like a person." He thought about that for a moment. "Fair point," he said. Emma nodded like the matter was settled. She stood, picked up her backpack, and kissed him on the cheek, a quick, efficient kiss, the kind that said "I love you, and I'm in a hurry, and you're going to be fine," all at the same time. "I'm going to Lily's after school," she said. "Lily's mom is picking us up." "I know. I got the text. Be home by 7. "I know the rules," she said, already moving toward the door. And then she stopped, turned around, looked at him one more time. "Dad." "Yeah, I'm glad you're home," she said, just like she'd said it before. But this time it landed differently. This time it didn't feel like relief. It felt like a choice. like she was offering it to him deliberately, knowing exactly what it meant. "Me too, Bug," he said. The door closed behind her. Daniel sat alone in the kitchen. The morning was quiet. Light was coming through the window over the sink. The honest, ordinary light of a regular Thursday in Ohio, and for a moment he just let it be what it was. Regular, ordinary, real. Then he got up, rinsed the plates, and went next door. He knocked on Madison's side door, the same door his daughter had knocked on 2 nights ago, barefoot and crying in the dark. There was a pause. Then footsteps. Then the door opened and Madison was there, still in her robe, coffee in hand, looking like someone who had also been awake for too long and had made peace with it. She looked at him for a second. Then she said, "You didn't sleep." "Not particularly," he said. She stepped back from the door. "Come in, I just made a fresh pot." He stepped inside. Madison's kitchen was warm and smelled like flour and coffee and something sweet that was cooling onto the counter, a round loaf of something dark, seeded bread, maybe, still steaming faintly. The kitchen was full of small things. Jars of spices lined up along the backsplash, a hand-painted sign near the window that said, "Make it with love," or "Don't make it at all." Stacks of worn cookbooks on the far counter with sticky tabs on half the pages. It felt, he thought, like the most lived-in room he'd been in years. He sat down at her kitchen table, and she poured him a cup of coffee without asking how he took it and set it in front of him. And he noticed she remembered black. No sugar, because apparently it told her that somewhere in the last 3 years, without realizing she'd filed it away. "I owe you more than a thank you," he said. "You don't owe me anything," she said, sitting down across from him. "Madison, I mean that." She wrapped her hands around her own mug. She was scared and alone, and she knocked on my door. I just answered it. That's not a debt. That's just being human. He looked at her. "Most people wouldn't have done what you did." "Some people would," she said. "The right people would." He turned the mug in his hands. "Emma said she told me what she said to you. About me getting lonely." Madison didn't flinch, didn't look away, didn't offer him the easy, out of pretending she didn't remember. "She did," she said. "I'm sorry she put that on you." "She didn't put anything on me," Madison said. "She was telling the truth about the person she loves. There's nothing to apologize for in that." He was quiet. Then he said, "I've been thinking about it all night. About how I've been so focused on not fall apart in front of her that I never stopped to consider what it looked like from her side. What she was carrying, because I was so busy making sure she didn't have to carry anything." Madison nodded slowly. "Kids pick up everything," she said. "The stuff you say and the stuff you don't. Especially the stuff you don't." "She's 8, he said, and his voice went rough on it. "She should not be worrying about whether her dad is lonely." "No," Madison said. "She shouldn't. A beat. But she loves you. And love doesn't check age requirements." That sat on him for a moment. He picked up his coffee, set it back down, looked at the table, then at her. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said. "You can ask," she said. "How long have you been watching out for us?" Like not in a "I don't mean that," in a weird way. "I just mean stopped. Started again." "Emma's comfortable with you. Real comfortable. Not the polite kind. The kind where she shows up on your doorstep at 9:30 at night without thinking twice. That doesn't happen overnight." Madison was quiet for a moment. "About 2 years," she said finally. He stared at her. "I used to see her out in the front yard when you were at work," she said. "After school, waiting for you. She'd sit on the porch steps and do her homework and wave at cars going by. And one afternoon, this was maybe 2 summers ago, she fell off her bike in the driveway. Just a little fall scraped her knee. She didn't cry. She just sat there on the ground and looked at her knee like she was figuring out what to do next." Daniel felt something clench in his chest. "I went over," Madison said. "I had a first aid kit. I cleaned it up and put a bandage on it, and she sat very still the whole time, and when I was done she said, 'Thank you, ma'am,' like a tiny adult. And then she went back to her homework." A small pause. "I thought about that kid for 3 days. That kind of composure in a little girl that age. It's not natural. It's learned." He said nothing. "I'm not criticizing you," she said quickly. "I want to be clear about that. I know what it costs to run a house alone. I know what it costs to just keep going every day when part of you is still figuring out how everything fell apart. I know it. She looked down at her coffee. I kept an eye out after that. Made sure she was okay. It wasn't anything deliberate. It was just being human, he said. She looked up. Being human, she agreed. He sat with that. And then he said, you said you know what it costs. Keeping things together alone. She looked at him steadily. I do. You live alone, he said. Not an accusation. Just an observation. I do, she said again. By choice? Something shifted in her expression. Not pain exactly. More like the particular stillness of someone who has answered this question internally, to themselves many times, and arrived each time at the same complicated place. Mostly, she said. And partly because when you look the way I look, people make a lot of decisions for you before you even open your mouth. She said it evenly, without bitterness. The way you say something that stopped hurting in the way it used to, even if it never stopped being true. He looked at her. People are stupid, he said. She blinked. Then unexpectedly, she laughed. A real one, short and genuine and a little surprised. That's yeah, she said. That's one word for it. I'm serious, he said. You spend 2 days watching my daughter, filling my refrigerator, and you're going to sit here and tell me that people see you and think you're not, that they don't. He stopped. Tried again. You're the most capable person on this street. Possibly in this neighborhood. Daniel, she said, quiet warning in her tone. I mean it, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Most people don't, she said. Mean it. I mean, most people say the right things because it's the nice thing to do. Because they feel guilty about the thoughts they had 2 seconds earlier. She wasn't accusing him. She was just telling him the truth of her experience. I'm not saying you're like that. I'm saying I've learned not to take compliments at face value. Comes with the territory. How long have you been building that wall? He said. She went still. Sorry, he said. No, she said. It was accurate. It just surprised me. She turned her mug in her hands. About the same time, you started building yours, I'd guess. The kitchen was quiet. The clock on her wall ticked. Outside, a car passed on Maplewood Drive, and then the street was quiet again. Emma thinks you're the best person on the planet, Daniel said. Emma is a very good judge of character, Madison said. She is, he said. She gets that from her mother. He paused. Which is maybe the only thing Sarah gave her that I'm grateful for. Madison said nothing. Just let that sit there where he'd put it. He'd never said that out loud before. Not to anyone. He wasn't sure why he'd said it now. He picked up his coffee and drank and let the silence be what it was. Then his phone buzzed. He pulled it out habit and looked at the screen. And everything that had been warm and quiet in that kitchen went cold. It was an email. From his bank. A fraud alert. The kind that was supposed to catch things before they became disasters. The kind he'd set up years ago and almost never thought about. Unusual activity detected on your business account. Multiple outgoing wire transfers initiated in the past 48 hours. Total amount, $34,700. Please verify or contact us immediately. He read it twice. He read it a third time. His voice, when it came out, was very controlled. Madison, he said. Did anything when you were watching Emma? Did anything happen? Anything unusual? Did anyone come to the house? She put down her coffee. Taishin. She looked at him the way someone looks when they've been waiting for a question and have already decided what to say when it arrives. I was going to tell you this morning, she said. I wanted to wait until you'd had some sleep, but minus. Tell me, he said. She reached across the table to a small ceramic bowl near the salt and pepper, the kind of bowl that collects the loose items of daily life. Rubber bands and spare change and receipts, and she pulled out a folded envelope and placed it in front of him. He looked at it. His name on the front. His address. No return address. Already. It came Tuesday, she said. In your mail. I was getting it and Emma asked me to check the box while she was at school, and I saw that it had already been opened. Not tampered with. Already opened. Like someone had opened it and resealed it and thought you wouldn't notice. He picked it up. I noticed, she said quietly. He unfolded the single sheet inside. It was a letter. Business letterhead, but wrong. The letterhead was for Hartfield and Associates, his company, but the address was slightly off. 1 digit different in the zip code. The kind of difference you'd miss if you weren't looking. He read it. And then he read it again. And then he set it down on the table very carefully, the way you once set something down, and you don't want anyone to see that they're not quite steady. "This is a forged document," he said. "I thought it might be," Madison said. "I don't know corporate law, but I know what something looks like when someone is trying to make it look like something it's not. It's authorizing transfers," he said, "from my business account. Payments to these accounts don't exist. Or they're not vendor accounts. I know every vendor we use." He looked up. "Who sent this?" "I don't know," she said. "But Daniel, there's something else." He waited. "Tuesday afternoon," she said, "while Emma was at school. A man came to your door. I saw him from my window. I didn't know him. He knocked. Got no answer. Went around to the side. Tried the gate to the backyard. I went out and asked him who he was. What did he say? He said he was a colleague of yours. Said he needed to leave some documents." She paused. He was confident about it. The kind of confident that's meant to make you stop asking questions. Daniel's jaw tightened. What did he look like? 40s. Dark hair going gray at the sides. Good suit. Nice shoes. Walked like someone who was used to people getting out of his way. Daniel went very still. "Did he have a scar?" he said. "Small one. Left side of his jaw, right here." He touched his own face. Madison looked at him. "Yes," she said. Daniel closed his eyes. He opened them. He said very quietly, one name, Ryan. And the kitchen that had been warm and real and full of the smell of bread and coffee turned into something else entirely. The space between him and what was happening in his bank account collapsed to nothing. 3 days away. 3 days. And Ryan Mitchell had moved, faster than Daniel had expected, faster than he'd thought possible, which meant Ryan had been planning this for longer than 3 days. Daniel stood up, pulled out his phone, started dialing. "Who are you calling?" Madison said. "My bank," he said. "And then my attorney." "Sit down," Madison said, firm. Not loud. Firm, he looked at her. "Sit down," she said again. "You call the bank in a panic. You're going to say the wrong thing and freeze the wrong accounts and make a mess that takes weeks to sort out. I've seen it happen." She said it like someone who had been through enough to know the difference between the right reaction and the reactive one. "Sit down. Tell me what you know about this man. All of it. And then we figure out what to make the first move." He looked at her for a long moment. He sat down, and he started talking. Ryan Mitchell. He and Daniel had met at a regional logistics conference in Cleveland 6 years ago, both of them building client bases in mid-size freight coordination. Ryan had seemed, at the time, like the best possible kind of ambitious, the driven kind, the focused kind, the kind that made you feel like you were moving faster just by standing near him. They'd formed a partnership 2 years later, not a formal incorporation, more of a working arrangement. They coordinated client accounts, split referral fees, covered for each other when schedules conflicted. It had worked well for about 18 months. And then Daniel's marriage started falling apart, and his focus split, and Ryan, who had no interest in anything that slowed him down, had started to pull away. The split had been clean, professional. They'd divided the client list, shaken hands, said no hard feelings, and meant it, more or less. Or Daniel had thought they'd meant it. 3 months ago, Daniel said, "I signed a contract with Colebrook Distribution. Biggest contract I've ever landed. Worth about $210,000 over 18 months. He looked at the letter on the table. Ryan pitched for the same account. He lost. Madison's expression shifted. "He came to congratulate me," Daniel said. "Took me out for drinks. Said it was the better team that won and he was proud of me." He pressed his lips together. I believed him. "You had no reason not to," Madison said. "I had every reason," Daniel said. "I just didn't use it." He picked up his phone. But this time he wasn't panicked. He was settled. Cold and clear and settled, in the way that only happens when anger has had time to find shape. "I need to make 3 calls," he said. "Bank first. Then my attorney. Then Colebrook. Why Colebrook? Madison said. Because if I went to the trouble of forging documents and accessing my mail, Daniels said. The transfers aren't the only thing he was trying to do. He looked at the letter again. He was trying to make Colebrook think I was using their advance payments for unauthorized expenses. He was going to make it look like I was stealing from my own client. Madison was quiet for a moment. He wanted the contract, she said. He wanted to make sure I couldn't keep it, Daniel said. There's a difference. He didn't want to win. He wanted me to lose. The word hung in the air between them. He wanted me to lose. Daniel thought about 3 days in Columbus, 3 days, of meetings and bad hotel food and not sleeping well and telling himself he could afford to step away because everything at home was handled. He thought about Ryan, knowing his schedule, and Ryan would have known it, because Ryan had recommended the Columbus supplier in the first place. He thought about the timing of it, so perfect and deliberate and cold. He thought about Emma, alone in the house, knocking on a neighbor's door. He picked up the phone. Daniel, Madison said. He looked at her. Whatever he tried to do, she said, he didn't finish. You're here. The accounts are flagged. The documents are on your table. She looked at him steadily. He moved fast. But you moved faster. Because you came home. He held her gaze. And in the middle of everything, the letter, the transfers, the cold clarity of betrayal, he felt something that was not gratitude exactly, or not only gratitude, something that was more complicated than that, more unfamiliar, the feeling of not being alone in it. He made the first call. The bank answered on the second ring. He gave them the account number, gave them the verification codes, gave them the fraud alert reference number, and said 4 words in a voice that left no room for ambiguity. Stop every outgoing transfer. There was a pause. Typing on the other end. Sir, we're showing 3 transfers initiated in the last 48 hours. 1 for $12,000, 1 for $9,500, 1 for $13,200. All 3 are still in processing. Stop all 3, he said. More typing. All 3 have been flagged and held, sir. Would you like to speak to our fraud department directly? Yes, he said. And I need documentation of the flagging timestamped for today. Email it to me within the hour. Of course. Transferring you now. He looked across the table at Madison while the hold music played. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite name. Not impressed exactly. More like relieved. Like she had been waiting for the version of him that sat in his own kitchen at midnight and thought he was holding everything together to finally meet the version of him that actually could. He spent 40 minutes on the phone. Bank first. Then his attorney, a woman named Grace Park, who had handled his divorce and who answered on the first ring, despite the hour, and said, when he'd finished explaining, send me the letter. I want it in my hands before noon, and then hung up without saying goodbye, because she was already doing 4 other things. Then Colebrook, where he left a message for the project manager and sent a follow-up email flagging the situation and making clear, in precise and professional language, that any documents or communications they might have received that week regarding payment redirections should be considered fraudulent and were under legal review. By the time he put the phone down, Madison had refilled his coffee twice without being asked and was sitting across from him eating toast, reading a cookbook she'd pulled from the counter, giving him the silence he needed to work and the company he needed to not feel like he was doing it in a void. He set the phone face down on the table. He looked at the ceiling, he said. He walked up to my door, in front of my daughter's house. He did, Madison said, without looking up from the cookbook. He intercepted my mail. He did. He forged a document with my company's name on it and used it to try to steal my Bixted account and empty my business account at the same time. He did all of that, she said, closing the cookbook. While you were away, while he thought no one was watching. He looked at her. He didn't count on you, he said. She shrugged. The smallest shrug, like it was the least important thing. He didn't think I was worth counting, she said. And in that moment, in the quiet of her warm kitchen, with the seeded bread cooling on the counter and the clock ticking, and the sound of the street outside beginning its ordinary Thursday business, Daniel Carter felt something harden into place. Not anger. Something more permanent than anger. Something more useful. I'm going to deal with him, he said. I know, she said. And when I do, he said, I want you there. She looked at him. Why, she said. Because he doesn't know your name, Daniel said. And I think it's time he learned it. She looked at him for a long moment. And then, very quietly, she said, Okay. The word sat between them like a promise. Outside on Maplewood Drive, the day was getting on. The morning light had shifted harder and clearer now, the kind of light that doesn't let things hide. A dog barked down the block. A car started somewhere. The neighborhood went about its business, completely unaware of what had been broken open in two kitchens on this side of the street. Daniel picked up the forged letter and folded it carefully and put it in his shirt pocket. He stood up. Thank you, he said, again still. Don't thank me yet, she said. This isn't over. No, he agreed, it's not. He walked to the side door, stopped with his hand on the frame. He turned around. Madison, he said. She looked at him from the table. Emma was right, he said. About you. She said you were the best neighbor in the world. She's right. Madison looked at him. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said quietly, She's the best kid in the world. So I think we're even. He nodded. He stepped outside. And he went back to his house, and to his phone, and to the work of dismantling exactly what Ryan Mitchell had spent 3 days building. He went back to his life. But it was different now. Not fixed. Not resolved. Not finished. But different. Because the wall he'd built was still there. But somewhere in the last 12 hours, without quite knowing when it happened, he'd left a door in it. And someone was standing on the other side. Grace Park called back at 11:47. Daniel was in his home office, the forged letter sitting on the desk in front of him. His laptop open to 3 different windows, his bank's fraud portal, his email, and a thread of text messages from his Colebrook contact that had started arriving 20 minutes ago in rapid, increasingly alarmed succession. He picked up on the first ring. I read it, Grace said. No hello. She hadn't done hello in the entire time he'd known her. 3 things. First, whoever did this is not an amateur. The letterhead is close enough that someone in a hurry would have signed off on it. Second, the zip code error is deliberate. It creates just enough technical distance that if it ever went to arbitration, they could argue clerical mistake rather than forgery. Third, this was timed. I know it was timed, Daniel said. No, Grace said. I mean, it was timed with legal precision. You were out of state. Any action taken on your account in your absence with a document like this creates an ambiguity window of up to 72 hours before financial institutions are required to flag it as potential fraud rather than authorized activity. A pause. Your bank's automated alert caught it at 61 hours. Daniel did the math. 11 hours. Ryan had missed by 11 hours. He planned this down to the hour, Daniel said. He planned this down to the hour, Grace confirmed. Which means this wasn't impulsive. This has been in development for weeks. Maybe longer. Another pause. He could hear her typing. I need you to think carefully. Has Ryan Mitchell had any access to your business operations in the last 60 days? Documents, emails, account information, anything, Daniel thought. He thought back through 60 days of ordinary business. Meet emails, phone calls that seemed routine. And then he landed on something. Something small that hadn't seemed like anything at the time. 6 weeks ago, he said slowly. He called me. Said he had a client who needed freight coordination in a region I work heavily in. Asked if we could meet for lunch to talk about a referral arrangement. Did you meet? Yes. Where my office, Daniel said. And then his stomach dropped. I left him alone in my office for about 15 minutes while I took a call. He said he'd wait. Grace was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Daniel, she said, does your computer lock automatically? He closed his eyes. No, he said. I turned the auto lock off 2 years ago because I kept losing work. The silence on Grace's end was the loudest thing he'd heard all morning. Okay, she said, and her voice had shifted into the gear she used when things had gotten worse than expected, and there was no point spending time on how that happened. Here is what we're doing. Today, I'm filing for a temporary restraining order against Mitchell citing financial fraud, unauthorized access to business documents, and mail tampering. The mail tampering alone is a federal offense, which changes the category of this significantly. Can you get me a witness statement from whoever handled the letter before you? Yes, he said immediately. Name? Madison Brooks. She lives next door. I'll need her statement by 3 this afternoon. Written, signed, dated, as detailed as possible what she saw, when she saw it, exactly what she touched and didn't touch with the envelope. A pause. Can she do that? She can do that, Daniel said. He was already standing up. He was already moving toward the door. He knocked on Madison's side door 2 minutes later, and when she opened it, he said, without preamble, I need a favor. A specific, time-sensitive, slightly legally inconvenient favor. She looked at him. Come in, she said. He told her what Grace needed. He told her about the 72-hour window, about the auto lock, about the 15 minutes Ryan had been alone in his office. He watched her face as he talked. She didn't flinch, didn't pull back, didn't give him the expression he half expected, the one that said, this is more than I signed up for. She just listened. When he finished, she said, I can write it all out. It'll take me about 30 minutes. You're sure? She gave him a look that suggested the question was beneath him. Sit down, she said. I'll make you something to eat while I write. You look like you haven't had anything since the toast. I haven't, he admitted. Then sit down, he sat. She got out paper, actual paper, not a keyboard, because Madison Brooks apparently wrote things the way people used to write things when they meant them. And she sat at the kitchen table with a pen, and she began to write in clear, steady, careful handwriting, while simultaneously directing him to the cabinet where she kept crackers, and to the refrigerator where there was leftover soup, and he found himself doing exactly what she said, without quite deciding to. The two of them worked in parallel silence for 20 minutes. Her writing, him eating soup he hadn't asked for, that was better than anything he'd made himself in months. She finished first. She put the pen down, read through what she'd written, all 4 pages of it, and then slid it across the table to him. He read it. It was precise, detailed, chronological. The envelope, the date, the time, the condition of the seal, the fact that she had not opened it further, but had held it at the edges, the description of the man who had come to the door on Tuesday afternoon, down to the scar on his jaw and the way he'd tried the gate to the backyard when no one answered the front. It was exactly what Grace needed. It was better than what Grace needed. Madison, he said. It's fine, she said, before he could thank her. Get it to your attorney. He photographed every page, sent it to Grace, received a reply in 4 minutes that said simply, perfect, filing at 2 p.m. He put the phone down on the table, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Madison said, how are you doing? He looked up. Honestly, she added. He thought about lying. Old habit. The reflex of the man who'd spent 3 years being fine. And then he thought about Emma in yellow star pajamas, saying not just the kind you say when you don't want me to worry. I'm angry, he said. Not chaotic angry. The cold kind. The kind that just sits there and doesn't go anywhere until you do something about it. She nodded. That's the useful kind, she said. Is it? Cold anger gets things done, she said. Hot anger makes mistakes. You want cold. He looked at her. How do you know that? Because I spent 2 years with the hot kind, she said, simply and without drama. Before I figured that out. He waited. She looked at her coffee mug for a moment. Then she said, I had a business partner too. Different situation. She wasn't a criminal. She was just dishonest. She let me do the building, and then she took the credit, and eventually the investors, and eventually the location. By the time I figured out what was happening, I'd lost the first bakery. He stared at her. The one on Chester Avenue is the second one, she said. I started over. I was 31 years old, and I started completely over. She picked up her mug. And I was hot angry for about 6 months, and I made about 6 months worth of bad decisions. And then one morning I woke up and I was just cold. And I filed the paperwork and I found the location and I built it back. She paused. And it's better than the first one. He sat with that for a moment. You never told anyone, he said. It wasn't a question. People don't ask, she said. They see the bakery. They see the woman behind the counter. They don't usually ask about the road that got her there. I'm asking, he said. She looked at him with an expression that was complicated and real and completely unguarded, just for a second, before she put the practical part of herself back in place. I know, she said. That's why I told you. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. A text from an unfamiliar number. He didn't recognize it. He opened it. It said, "You should have stayed in Columbus." He showed it to Madison. She read it. Her jaw tightened. Ryan? Has to be, he said. He knows the restraining order application is moving. Someone in his circle must have... He stopped. He has a contact at the courthouse. Can he block it? Not the filing, Daniel said. But if he knows it's coming, he knows he's running out of time to... He stopped again. Something clicked. He pulled up his email, went to the Colebrook thread. The last message from his project manager, Tom Aldridge, had come in 40 minutes ago, and he'd skimmed it without fully processing what it said. He read it again, fully this time. Daniel received a call this morning from someone identifying himself as your legal representative, stating that due to a compliance investigation, you've requested a 60-day suspension of the contract while accounts are reviewed. We're trying to verify this. Please advise. Daniel read it a third time. He put the phone on the table. He said, very calmly, he called Colebrook this morning, told them I was under investigation, and asked them to suspend the contract. Madison was quiet. He's not trying to steal the money anymore, Daniel said. He's trying to make sure I lose the contract entirely, even if the fraud case goes my way, even if every dollar comes back. He looked at the table. Because if Colebrook suspends, they have a right to reassign, and he'll be the one available to step in. He planned for this, Madison said. He planned for all of it, Daniel said. The money was never the point. The contract was always the point. He picked up the phone and called Tom Aldridge directly. It rang 3 times. Daniel? Tom answered, and his voice had the careful quality of a man who wasn't sure what he was walking into. I was just about to. Tom, Daniel said. That call you received this morning was not from my legal representative. I do not have a legal representative contacting you. What I do have is an active fraud case against a former associate who has been attempting to intercept my business operations for the past 3 days. My attorney has already filed. I can have documentation to you within the hour. A beat of silence. Who was Ed? The man who called. His name is Ryan Mitchell. He pitched for the Colebrook account before I won it. He's been trying to take it back through fraud since he couldn't take it through legitimate means. Another silence. Longer this time, Daniel, Tom said. This man told me he told us that you were personally unreliable, that the single father situation made you a liability, that you were... He stopped. Daniel's grip on the phone tightened. He said that, Daniel said. I didn't. Want to be clear, I didn't take it seriously. But, Tom. Daniel kept his voice even. Flat and even and completely controlled. I have been 3 days in Columbus delivering on this contract ahead of schedule. I have a fraud attorney who filed 2 hours ago. I have a witness statement and documented evidence. What I don't have is any interest in being judged by my personal circumstances by a man who tried to empty my bank account while my 8-year-old daughter was home alone. He paused once. Send me whatever documentation you received from him. I need it for the legal case. Silence. Then Tom said, I'll send it in 10 minutes. And Daniel, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. We should have called you immediately. You're calling me now, Daniel said. That's what matters. He hung up. He sat very still for a moment. Madison, across the table, said nothing. She just watched him. Not with pity, not with alarm, with the steady, calm attention of someone who understood that some moments needed to be finished before they could be talked about. He said, he told them the single father thing made me a liability. Yes, she said. He used Emma, Daniel said. He used the fact that I'm raising her alone, and he tried to use it to make a professional case against me. Yes, she said again. Steady. He thought that would work, Daniel said. He thought a lot of things, Madison said. Daniel looked at the table for a long moment. And then something happened in his face, not breaking, not collapsing, but a kind of settling. The way a building settles when the storm passes and the structure holds, and you find out what it's actually made of. I'm going to finish this today, he said. Not loudly, Not dramatically, just as a statement of fact. I know, Madison said. And then I'm going to pick Emma up from Lily's at 7, and I'm going to take her out for pizza, and I'm not going to take her about any of this, because she doesn't need to carry it. Good, Madison said. And then tomorrow, he said, and he looked at her, I'd like to take you to dinner. Not as a thank you, not as a neighborly thing. As he stopped, looked at the table, looked back at her. I'd like to take you to dinner because I've been living next door to you for 4 years and I've waved at you from driveways, and I didn't know you'd lost a business and rebuilt it. I didn't know you stayed up late baking because the nights are long. I didn't know you had kind eyes until you were standing in my dark driveway at midnight, and now I can't unknow it. He stopped. And I'd like to know the rest. Madison looked at him. She looked at him for long enough that he started to think he'd misread everything: the kitchen, the soup, the steady company of the last 12 hours, and that he was about to feel like a fool on top of everything else. Then she said, It's a school night. Saturday, he said. Emma would be at my mother's, he said, who has been asking me to take a night off for 2 years. Another pause. I have to be at the bakery by 6 Sunday morning, she said. I'll have you home by 10. She looked at her coffee. She looked at him. Okay, she said. The same word she'd said the night before on his front step. But this time it was different. This time it meant something that neither of them was going to name yet, because some things earned their names slowly, and this was one of them. He nodded. He stood up. He had 3 more phone calls to make. A documentation package to Grace, and a text to answer from a number he was about to block permanently. He picked up the phone. He pulled up Ryan's text, "You should have stayed in Columbus," and he stared at it for a moment. Then he put the phone back down without answering. Not because he had nothing to say. Because some responses are better made through attorneys. He went back to his house. He sat at his desk. He spent the next 4 hours doing the kind of focused, methodical work that his cold anger was made for: pulling records, documenting the timeline, compiling the email thread from Colebrook, forwarding the mysterious text to Grace, who replied with a single word: excellent. At 2:17 in the afternoon, he got an email from Grace. TRO granted. Mitchell has been served. He cannot contact you, your business contacts, your financial institutions, or come within 100 yards of your property. If he does, he's in contempt. We'll hear from a judge on the full injunction within 2 weeks. The mail tampering referral goes to the postal inspector today. Federal jurisdiction. Daniel read it. He read it again. He leaned back in his chair. And he thought about Ryan Mitchell, in his good suit and his nice shoes, walking up to this house, trying the backyard gate, so certain that there was no one here to see him, so certain that the quiet woman next door with the side door and the kitchen light on was not worth a second thought. He thought about how much of Daniel's life Ryan had looked at and concluded was weakness. The single father thing, the divorce, the 2 jobs, the never going out, the house that was always just him and Emma. All of it, in Ryan's calculation, adding up to a man who was distracted and vulnerable, and could be taken apart quietly while he was 3 hours away in a Columbus hotel room. It hadn't added up to that. It had added up to a man with a neighbor who paid attention. His phone buzzed. Text from Emma. Lily's mom said, "Can I stay for dinner too? They're having tacos." He smiled. Actually smiled, the real kind. "Yes," he typed back. "But home by 7:30. School tomorrow." "Yes," she replied, followed by 3 taco emojis. He put the phone down. The house was quiet. He looked around his office, at the desk, the documents, the laptop, the framed photo of Emma that sat on the corner of the desk and had been there so long. Stop seeing it the way you stop seeing the things that are always there. He saw it now. Her school picture from last year, gap in her front teeth that had since filled in, wearing the blue sweater he'd argued with her about for 20 minutes because it had a small stain on the cuff that she didn't care about and he did. She was grinning like the world was a joke she was in on. He sat there for a moment. He thought about what Ryan had said to Tom Aldridge, that the single father situation made Daniel a liability, that his personal circumstances were a professional weakness. He thought about how cleanly and confidently Ryan had weaponized The hardest thing in Daniel's life, the thing he'd poured every bit of himself into getting right and used it as evidence of failure. And he thought about how wrong Ryan was. Not just factually wrong, not just legally wrong, in the deep and specific way that people are wrong when they look at someone's entire life and see only the shape of it, never the weight. The single father thing wasn't what made Daniel vulnerable. It was what made him stand up. Every single time. He closed the laptop. He went downstairs. He went to the refrigerator and took out the remaining lasagna and put it in the oven at 350 and set the timer for 30 minutes. He put a pot of water on the stove, for pasta. Emma would want something when she got home, even after tacos, because Emma had a relationship with food that reminded him of someone, though he was only now starting to understand who. While the water heated and the oven ran and the house filled with the smell of garlic and tomato and cheese, Daniel Carter stood in his kitchen and did something he hadn't done in a very long time. He stood there and did nothing, just stood there, in his own kitchen, in his own life, and let it be around him, without immediately finding the next thing to fix or the next problem to solve or the next wall to shore up. He just stood there. And for the first time in 3 years, that felt like enough. When Emma got home at 7:22, backpack on, smelling like someone else's house and tacos, she stopped in the kitchen doorway and sniffed. "Is that Madison's lasagna?" she said. "It is," he said. "You heated it up this time?" "I did." She nodded with grave satisfaction. "Good," she said. "You're learning." She dropped her backpack by the stairs, in the way he had been trying to break her of for 2 years, kicked off her shoes in the hall, in the way he had been trying to break her of for 3, and came into the kitchen and sat down at the table. He put a plate in front of her. She picked up her fork, and then she looked at him, across the table with those dark, too perceptive eyes, and she said, "Something happened today." He looked at her. "Good something or bad something?" she said. He thought about it honestly. "Both," he said. "But the good is bigger than the bad." She considered this with the seriousness of a person evaluating a business proposition. "Okay," she said. "That's okay then." "Yeah," he said. "I think it is." She ate her lasagna. He ate his. The kitchen was warm. The clock on the wall ticked. Outside, Maplewood Drive was settling into its evening quiet, and somewhere in the house next door, he knew, a woman with kind eyes was probably baking something at this hour, because the nights were long and the oven was warm, and that was how she'd learned to make it through them. He made a mental note to ask her about that on Saturday, over dinner. But first he had one more thing to do. He waited until Emma had finished eating and disappeared upstairs with her homework slack and her flashlight and the closet that smelled like her sweaters. He waited until the house settled into its evening rhythm. And then he picked up his phone and he opened the text thread from Ryan's number, the one that had said, "You should have stayed in Columbus." He looked at it one more time. And then he blocked the number, permanently and without any drama, and put his phone face in the kitchen table, and listened to his daughter upstairs and thought about how close it had all come to going a different way. 11 hours. Ryan had missed by 11 hours. And those 11 hours existed because a woman with a side hitch light on had been awake at 9:30 angry on a Tuesday night when a little girl in yellow star pajamas came knocking. Daniel Carter did the dishes. He dried them. He turned off the kitchen light. And he went upstairs to say goodnight to his daughter. He told Emma about Saturday, over breakfast, Friday morning. He kept it simple. He said he was going to dinner with Madison and that Grandma Carol was coming to stay with her for the night. He said it, the way he said most things directly, without building it up into something it might not survive being built up into. Emma put her spoon down in her cereal bowl. She looked at him. She said, "Like a date?" He said, "Like dinner." She picked her spoon back up, took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. Then she said, "Dad, I'm 8, not 4. Is it a date?" He looked at his coffee. "It might be dinner that becomes a date," he said, "depending on how it goes." Emma nodded slowly, with the expression of someone filing important information. "Madison makes really good food," she said. "So she probably also knows how to eat at good restaurants." "That's your criteria," he said. "It's a start," she said, and went back to her cereal. He almost laughed. He almost told her she was the strangest and most wonderful person he knew. Instead, he said, "Finish your breakfast." And she did, and they drove to school in the usual Friday mornings. Silence that was comfortable in the way that only years of the same routine can make silence comfortable. When she got out of the car, she leaned back through the window and said, "Tell Madison I said she should order dessert. She always says she shouldn't." Then she was gone, backpack bouncing, already into the crowd of kids streaming toward the entrance, already in her own world. He sat in the pickup line for a moment after she disappeared. He thought about Ryan Mitchell. 48 hours ago, he had been standing in his driveway at midnight with a suitcase, and that something was wrong. Now Ryan was under a temporary restraining order. The postal inspector had opened a federal file, and Grace Park had left him a voicemail at 7 this morning that said, in her characteristically compressed way, "Colebrook is satisfied. Contract stands. Mitchell's attorney called. They want to discuss settlement before this goes further. I told them to call back Monday. Have a good weekend, Daniel." Click. Settlement. Ryan Mitchell, who had called Daniel a liability, who had used his daughter as a professional weapon, who had stood in Daniel's driveway in a good suit and tried the gate to his backyard like he owned it. Mitch's attorney was calling Spain to discuss settlement. Daniel let that sit for exactly as long as it deserved, which was about 30 seconds, and then he pulled out of the school pickup line and drove to his office and went to work. He was good at work. He had always been good at work. It was the other parts that had gone sideways on him, the parts where you were supposed to let people in, the parts where strength meant knowing when to put something down instead of picking up more. Work he understood. Work had rules and outcomes and measurable results. Work didn't wake up at 3 in the morning and wonder if it was doing enough. By noon, he had cleared his inbox, confirmed 3 client calls for the following week, and sent a detailed account reconciliation to his bank's fraud team. By 2 o'clock, he had spoken with Tom Aldridge again, a real conversation this time, not a crisis call, the kind of conversation that reminded him why he'd wanted this contract in the first place. Because Tom was sharp and direct and cared about the work the way Daniel cared about the work. They talked for 40 minutes. When they hung up, Tom had said, "Just so you know, whatever Mitchell told us about your personal situation, it had the opposite effect. Nobody on this team has any interest in working with someone who operates the way he does." Daniel had said thank you. He'd meant it. Friday afternoon moved. He left the office at 4:30, which was early by his standards, and felt almost transgressive. He picked up dry cleaning. He stopped at the grocery store, not the quick stop where he grabbed whatever was fastest, but an actual deliberate walk through the store where he bought things he actually wanted and didn't calculate how long each item would take to prepare. He bought good coffee. He bought the bread Emma liked. He bought the expensive pasta his mother used to make on Sundays when he was a kid, and that he hadn't bought in years because it seemed like an unnecessary expense for a Tuesday night when he was eating alone over his laptop. He didn't know why he bought it Friday. He bought it anyway. He got home at 5:15. The house was quiet in the way it always was between Emma's school pickup and the moment she actually walked through the door, which on Fridays was usually closer to 6, to Lily's. He had 50 minutes. He changed out of his work clothes. He stood in his bedroom and looked at his closet for a minute, which he did not normally do, because normally getting dressed was not a thing he spent time on. He was a logistics manager. He wore what was clean and pressed and appropriate. He had a uniform for every situation, and it served him fine. He stared at the closet for a full minute. Then he texted his mother, "Can you come over tonight instead of tomorrow night? I need to talk to you." His mother, Carol Carter, replied in 4 seconds, which meant she'd been holding her phone with, "I've been waiting for you to say that for 2 years. Give me an hour." He put the phone down. He didn't know why he'd sent that text. He hadn't planned it. Something about Friday afternoon, about the dry cleaning and the pasta and the 50 minutes of quiet in an empty house, had made him want his mother in a way he hadn't let himself want her in a long time. He'd been keeping her at the same managed distance he kept everyone: polite, grateful, present without being open. The visits every few weeks, the phone calls, the holiday dinners, where he was cheerful and capable and fine, and she watched him with the particular expression of a woman who had raised him and knew the difference between fine and actually fine. She'd been watching that expression for 3 years. She'd been kind enough not to say it out loud. She arrived at 6:10, while Emma was still at Lily's, and she walked through the front door with a container of something homemade, because Carol Carter had never arrived anywhere empty-handed in her life. And she took one look at her son standing in the kitchen, and she said, "There you are." Just that. There you are. Like she'd been waiting. Like she'd known he'd find his way back. He sat down at the kitchen table, and she sat across from him, and she poured them both coffee, and she waited, the way she had always waited when he was a kid, and needed to find his way to something before he could say it out loud. "I've been doing it wrong," he said. She didn't ask what he meant. "I've been so focused on not falling apart in front of Emma that I forgot how to just be with her. I've been performing it. The dad thing. The strong and capable thing. And she's been watching me perform it, and she's been worried about me because of it, not in spite of it." His mother wrapped her hands around her mug. "I know," she said quietly. "You could have told me," he said. "I did," she said, in about 15 different ways. "You weren't ready to hear it." He looked at the table. "I'm hearing it now," he said. "I know," she said again. "I can tell. You look different." "I look the same," he said. "You look like yourself," she said. "That's different." He didn't know what to do with that, so he told her about Madison. He told her about Tuesday night and Emma in the star pajamas and the side door and the kitchen table and the hot chocolate that wasn't from a packet. He told her about the lasagna and the note on the refrigerator and the 4 pages of careful handwriting that had helped Grace file a federal mail tampering case. He told her about the 61 hours and the 11 hours and the way Ryan had tried to use Emma as evidence of weakness. His mother listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The woman next door." "Yes," he said. "The one who runs the bakery." "Yes." She looked at him with an expression he recognized from childhood, the one that said she had already arrived at a conclusion and was waiting to see if he was going to get there himself. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. "You're taking her to dinner." "Saturday night," he said. "Good," she said simply. "That's it? Good? What else would I say?" She picked up her mug. "She took care of your daughter. When you were away, she stopped a fraud case that could have cost you your biggest contract. And apparently she does it all from a kitchen that makes your house smell like something worth coming home to." She looked at him over her mug. "What more do you want me to say, Daniel?" He looked at her. "I don't know what this is," he said. "I don't know if it's... I haven't done this since Sarah. I don't know how to do this without." "You don't need to know," his mother said. "You need to show up. That's all. You've always known how to show up. You just forgot it applies to more than work and Emma." He sat with that. Emma came home at 6:40, saw her grandmother at the kitchen table, and dropped her backpack on the floor of the hallway. With a crash that rattled the coat, hooks, and slack, launched herself at Carol with the particular enthusiastic violence that 8-year-olds reserve for grandmothers. Carol caught her, held her, kissed the top of her head 3 times, while Emma tolerated it with loud protest and obvious pleasure. "You're staying?" Emma demanded. "Tonight and tomorrow night," Carol said. Emma turned to look at her father with an expression that was approximately 70% approval and 30% suspicion. "Is this because of the date?" she said. Carol looked at Daniel. "It might be dinner that becomes a date," Daniel said, using his own words. "Resigned." Emma turned back to her grandmother. "He's nervous," she confided, in a whisper that was fully audible to every person in the room. "I can hear you," Daniel said. "I know," Emma said, and went to get a snack. Carol looked at her son with an expression that suggested that if he hadn't figured out in the last 8 years what an extraordinary person he'd raised, she was not sure what more the universe could do. He hadn't figured it out. He was starting to. Saturday arrived the way Saturdays do, slowly and all at once. He took Emma to her soccer game in the morning, stood on the sideline in the October cold with his hands in his pockets, and watched her run with the absolute full-body commitment of a person who played every game like it might be the last one, And he thought about what it had cost her, not soccer, not childhood, but the other thing. The quiet thing, the carrying it alone thing that she'd learned from him, whether he'd meant to teach it or not. After the game, she had hot chocolate from the concession stand and he had terrible coffee, and they sat on the bleachers while the next set of kids took the field, and she leaned against his arm and said, without looking at him, "Dad, yeah, I'm glad you're different now." He looked at her. "I'm the same," he said. The same thing he'd said to his mother. She looked up at him with the patience of someone who has heard this argument before and does not find it convincing. "You bought good pasta," she said. "I saw it in the cabinet. And that means I'm different?" "The other kind comes in a blue box," she said. "The kind you bought has a different name I can't pronounce. That means something." He stared at her. "You're very strange," he said. "I know," she said. "You tell me that a lot." She picked up her hot chocolate. "It's okay. Strange is interesting." He dropped her at his mother's place at 4 in the afternoon. Carol had already started something on the stove that smelled like the pot roast from his childhood. And Emma was through the door and at the kitchen counter in approximately 4 seconds, asking what she could help with, which meant she wanted to taste things. He kissed his mother on the cheek, and she pushed him toward the door and said, "Go get ready. And don't overthink the outfit." He went home. He did not overthink the outfit. He mostly failed at not overthinking the outfit. He settled on what he settled on, and he stood in the bathroom looking at himself in the mirror, and he said, out loud, to no one, "You've closed $1,000,000 logistics deals. You can manage dinner." His reflection looked skeptical. He went next door at 6:55. He knocked on Madison's front door this time, not the side door, because this was not a crisis, and this was not a favor, and this was not the middle of the night. This was deliberate. This was something else. The door opened, and he understood, in the immediate and uncomplicated way of a man who has stopped pretending he isn't paying attention, that he had been significantly underestimating Ms. Madison Brooks from a much closer distance than he'd realized. She was wearing a deep burgundy dress, fitted with small gold earrings, and her dark hair, pinned up with a few pieces falling loose around her face. She looked like herself, which was the thing he would think of later, when he was trying to describe it, not dressed up into a different version. Just herself, but in sharper focus. The way a photograph looks when someone adjusts the lens and the thing that was always there suddenly resolves. She looked at him for a half-second with an expression he couldn't quite read. Then she said, "You're on time." "I'm always on time," he said. "I know," she said. "Emma told me." She picked up her bag from inside the door and stepped out and pulled the door closed behind her, and they stood on her front step together on a Saturday October evening in Ohio, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Then he said, "You look Madison. You look—" "Don't," she said, but not harshly, gently. The way someone says it when they're not ready for the word and not entirely sure they'll believe it when they hear it. He understood that. He nodded. "Ready?" she said. They walked to his car. The restaurant he'd chosen was in the next town over, not a production, not trying too hard, but quiet and good. The kind of place that gets the small things right. Tablecloths but not formal. Good wine list. A menu that had 6 things on it, and all 6 were worth ordering. They talked. That was the thing he would remember. Not the food, though the food was good. Not the wine, though the wine was right. The talking. The way it moved, not like a first date, not awkward and performative and full of the careful presentation of edited selves, but like two people who had already seen each other in crisis and decided to stay and were now figuring out the parts in between. She told him about the first bakery. The whole story this time, not the abbreviated version she'd offered him in her kitchen. Her partner's name was Denise. They'd met in culinary school. Denise had the charm, and Madison had the skill, and for 2 years they'd made it work, in a building they'd rented in the Short North District in Columbus. The investors came in the 3rd year. Denise cultivated them, presented to them, became their face. And when the investors wanted a change in leadership, Denise had been ready for that conversation, and Madison had not. She told it without drama. But he heard what was underneath it, the particular exhaustion of a person who had built something real and watched someone else take credit for the building of it. and who had been too honest to fight the kind of fight that would have required her to be dishonest to win. You could have contested it, he said. I could have, she said. And I would have spent 18 months in litigation and come out with either a broken business or enough money to start over, and I chose to start over. She looked at her wine glass. I made the right choice. I know that now, but at the time it felt like losing. It felt like losing everything. But you started over, he said. I started over, she said. Smaller location, better recipes, no partner. She looked at him. I learned what I was actually good at, and I stopped trying to be good at the things I wasn't. Denise was good at people. I'm good at product. I stopped needing to be both. Is that lonely? He said. Being just the product person. She considered this honestly. Sometimes, she said. But I built something I can be proud of on my own terms. And that's worth more than the alternative. He looked at her. What? She said. Nothing, he said. You remind me of someone. Who? Me, he said. 5 years ago, before I forgot how to say that. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, What happened? With Sarah. If you want to, I want to, he said. He told her. The real version, not the one he gave to neighbors and colleagues, which was we grew apart. And it was mutual and amicable, and all the other phrases that make a divorce sound like a business decision. The real version, which was that Sarah had wanted a life that moved, and Daniel had been building something rooted, and neither of them had been honest enough with the other or themselves until the distance was too wide to cross. She hadn't been cruel. He hadn't been either. They'd just failed to translate for each other until the translation became impossible. The hardest part, he said, wasn't the divorce. It was telling Emma. And then the second hardest part was realizing that Emma handled it better than I did. Madison smiled. Not a laugh, a real quiet, knowing smile. Because she'd already adapted, Madison said. Kids are already doing the thing adults spend years resisting. Adapting, he said, living in whatever is real, she said. Not what they planned. He sat with that. Their food arrived. They ate. They talked about smaller things for a while. The bakery's early hours, his mother's pot roast, the fact that Emma had apparently given Madison detailed instructions that morning about what to order for dessert. She texted me, Madison said. He stared. She has your number? She's had my number for about 8 months, Madison said. She asked for it when she found a caterpillar in the backyard and wanted a second opinion on whether to keep it. A second opinion, he said. She kept it for 3 days and then let it go, Madison said. She named it Gerald. He put his fork down. He looked at the woman across the table from him. This woman, who had Gerald the caterpillar's 3-day tenure in her phone history, who had 4 pages of careful handwriting in Grace Park's legal file, who had been awake at 9:30 on a Tuesday with a kitchen light on when his daughter needed somewhere to go, and he felt something happen in his chest that he hadn't felt in so long he almost didn't recognize it. Not gratitude, not relief, not the complicated warmth of someone who'd been helped and was processing the debt of it. Something simpler. Something that didn't have conditions attached. Emma told me something this morning, Madison said. She was looking at her plate. What? She looked up. She said, Don't let him talk the whole time about work. Ask him about stuff he actually cares about. He blinked. She said that. Word for word. He leaned back. And what stuff does she think I actually care about? She gave me a list, Madison said. Her coffee. Old baseball. The way houses are built. Apparently you find load-bearing architecture interesting. She said it with total seriousness. I do find load-bearing architecture interesting, he said, slightly defensive. She knows, Madison said. She said you explained it to her for 45 minutes when they were repairing the neighbor's house 2 blocks over. She seemed engaged, he said. She was being polite, Madison said. She's 8. She is exceptionally good at polite. He laughed. A real one, the same kind that had come out of him in the kitchen when Emma told him about the closet. Unguarded and genuine, and a little surprised by itself. Madison was smiling. And he thought, watching her smile, that it was one of the best things in a long catalog of things he had failed to notice about the person who lived 12 feet away from him. The check came. He paid it before she could argue, and she let him with the grace of someone who had picked the battles worth picking. They walked to the car. The night was cold, properly cold, the kind that arrives in Ohio in October, like a landlord who's been patient long enough, she said as they drove back. Ryan. He glanced at her. Yeah. What happens now? Settlement talks Monday, he said. Grace is optimistic. Between the mail tampering federal and the fraud attempt, and the TRO, he doesn't have much ground to stand on. His attorney knows it. Will he fight it? He might, Daniel said. Ryan's not good at backing down. It's part of what made him effective as a partner, and what made him dangerous when he stopped being one. He paused. But effective and smart aren't the same thing. He miscalculated. Badly. And I think some part of him knows it. He's going to have to face it, Madison said. Whatever comes out of the settlement. He's going to have to stand in front of it. Yes, Daniel said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I want to be there. When you meet with him. If you do, if it goes to a meeting rather than just paperwork. She said it clearly. Not dramatically. Just directly, the way she said most things. He looked at her. Why, he said. Because he looked at your house and saw a liability, she said. And I want him to see what he actually missed. Daniel kept his eyes on the road. Something tightened in his chest. Not painfully. The opposite of painfully. Grace would need you there as a witness anyway, he said. Then it works out, she said. He pulled onto Maplewood Drive. He pulled into his driveway. He cut the engine. They sat for a moment in the quiet of the car. He said, I had a good time tonight. So did I, she said. I'd like to do it again, he said. I'd like that, too, she said. He walked her to her door. They stood on the front step. Her front step this time, not his. Not the side door in the middle of the night, but the real front door in the porch light on a Saturday evening, like people who had chosen to be here. She turned to face him. He said, Emma said to tell you to order dessert. I realized I forgot to pass that on until now. She smiled. I ordered the creme brulee. Was it good? It was perfect, she said. She'll want a full report. He nodded. He said, Madison. She looked at him. Thank you, he said. Not for the lasagna. Not for the statement. For being the person who answered the door. For my daughter. For all of it. She looked at him for a long moment. And then she said, You would have done the same. I don't know that, he said. I do, she said. Simply and without hesitation. That's what I see from next door. A man who shows up for people. You just forgot to let anyone show up for you. He stood there on her front step in the October cold. And he thought about 4 years of driveways and waves, and the thin strip of yard between their houses and 12 feet that had been a mile. And he thought about what it cost, all of it. All that distance, and what it had taken to close it. A little girl in yellow star pajamas. A side door with a light on. A woman who answered. Good night, Madison, he said. Good night, Daniel, she said. She went inside. He stood on the step for a moment after the door closed. Then he walked back to his house and he went inside. And he did not feel the way a man feels when a night has ended. He felt the way a man feels when something is beginning. He called his mother to check on Emma. Emma answered the phone. How was it? She said immediately. Not even a hello. It was good, he said. Did she order dessert? She did. A pause, then satisfied. Good, I told her to. Another pause. Was it a date? He looked at the ceiling of his quiet house. Yeah, bug. I think it was. Okay, she said. The same okay. The one that meant she'd filed it, categorized it, approved it, and was moving on. Grandma says I can have hot chocolate before bed. 1 cup, he said. She already said 2. 1, he said. Okay, she said. Love you, Dad. Love you, bug. He hung up. He sat in his kitchen for a while. He thought about Ryan Mitchell's settlement call on Monday, which he was not afraid of. He thought about the contract that was still his, which he had earned. He thought about Saturday dinner, and the burgundy dress, and the creme brulee, and 8 months of texts about a caterpillar named Gerald. He thought about what his daughter had said in the bleachers when, I'm glad you're different now. He got up and went to the cabinet and took out the good pasta and looked at the name he couldn't pronounce on the package and put it back. Not tonight, but soon, because some things are better when there's someone to make them for. And for the first time in 3 years, he was beginning to believe he might not be eating alone. Monday arrived the way Mondays always do, when something important is waiting on the other side of them, with a particular weight, a particular texture that makes ordinary things feel loaded. The coffee tasted sharper. The morning light felt deliberate. Even the drive to the office had an edge to it that Daniel couldn't quite shake and didn't try to. Grace Park called at 8:42. "Mitchell's attorney wants to meet at 11, she said. "In person." "Their office." "Their office," Daniel repeated. "They want home advantage," Grace said. "Psychological play. Very standard, very transparent." "Fine," Daniel said. "I want Madison Brooks there," Grace said, as the material witness. "Her presence changes the room." "She already agreed," Daniel said. A pause. "Good. I'll see you at 10:30. We'll go in together, click." He texted Madison, "Meeting at 11. Grace wants you there. Are you still okay with this?" The reply came back in under a minute. "I'll be ready at 10:15. No hesitation. No qualification. Just ready." He sat at his desk for a moment after that, not working, just thinking about the word ready. About how long it had taken him to be ready for things, ready to admit he was struggling, ready to let someone in, ready to stand in his own kitchen at midnight and feel something real instead of performing something functional. About how Madison had been ready the whole time. Ready in the way that people are who have already gone through the fire and come out the other side and decided that being ready is simply the only way to stand. He picked up his phone and called Emma's school to make sure everything was settled for afternoon pickup. His mother was covering. The school had the note. Everything was in order. The school secretary, a woman named Pat, who had worked the front desk for 22 years and knew the name and face of every child in the building, said, "Emma had a great Friday, Mr. Carter. She wrote a story in language arts about a neighbor who bakes bread and saves the day. Her teacher thought it was lovely." Daniel said, "Thank you, Pat." He sat with that for a moment, after he hung up. His daughter had written a story about Madison Brooks. His daughter, who processed the world through Yellow Star pajamas and soccer games and caterpillars named Gerald, had sat down in her language arts class and written the story the way she understood it, which was, probably, the most accurate version of all. He got to Grace's office at 10:28. Grace was already in the lobby with her coat on and her briefcase in hand, which meant she'd been ready since 10. She looked at him, looked at Madison standing beside him, and gave a single nod of what Daniel had learned. Over 3 years of knowing Grace Park was the closest she got to approval. "Ms. Brooks," Grace said. "Thank you for coming." "Of course," Madison said. "I may ask you to speak directly to what you observed," Grace said. "Probably once, briefly. I'll signal you. Other than that, I'd like you to simply be present." "Understood," Madison said. Grace looked at Daniel. "How clear," he said. She nodded again. "Good. Let's go." Mitchell's attorney had offices in a building downtown 10th floor, corner suite, the kind of space deliberately constructed to make visitors aware that the people sitting behind the desks could afford the view. Daniel had been in rooms like this before. He understood what they were for. He also understood that a room's furniture had nothing to do with nothing strength of the argument being made inside it. They were shown into a conference room at 11:05. Ryan was already there, and seeing him sitting at the far end of a conference table in a charcoal suit, hair slightly less perfect than usual, eyes moving to the door with a calculation that didn't quite manage to look casual, hit Daniel in a particular way. Not with rage, not with the hot anger Madison had warned him about, with something colder and more clarifying, like stepping outside into November air and feeling your breath sharpen. Ryan looked at Daniel, then his eyes moved to Madison. Something shifted in his face. Something that was not quite recognition, but was close to it, the expression of a man recalibrating, realizing that the pieces on the board were not arranged the way he'd expected. He had not expected Madison Brooks to be in this room. Ryan's attorney, a tall man named Gerald Hatch, whom Grace knew by reputation and did not appear to hold in particularly high regard, gestured to the seats across the table. They sat. Grace placed her briefcase on the table and opened it with the deliberate, unhurried motion of a woman who understood that time was a tool. "We Appreciate you coming in, Hatch began. We're not here for pleasantries, Grace said pleasantly. Let's talk about what you're offering. Hatch looked at Ryan. Ryan looked at his water glass. Our client acknowledges that the situation has become complicated, Hatch said. Complicated, Grace repeated, in a tone that made the word sound exactly as inadequate as it was. There are aspects of the timeline that Mr. Mitchell would like to contextualize, Gerald, Grace said. Not unkindly, just firmly. Your client forged corporate documents in my client's name. He intercepted federal mail. He made unauthorized contact with my client's largest account using false representations. He entered my client's property without permission and attempted to access a secured area. He then sent a text message that our technical analyst has confirmed originated from his number at 11:43 a.m. on Thursday, October 9th. She placed a single printed sheet on the table and slid it toward Hatch. That's a federal witness intimidation issue, on top of everything else. She folded her hands. So I'd like to skip the contextualization and get to the number. The room was quiet. Ryan's jaw was tight. He was looking at the table. And then he looked up, not at Grace, not at Daniel, at Madison. He looked at Madison for a long moment, with the particular expression of a man trying to understand how he'd been seen by someone he'd dismissed entirely. Trying and failing to locate where in his careful plan he'd left a gap large enough for a woman with a side door and a kitchen light to walk through and dismantle everything. Madison looked back at him. She didn't look away. She didn't look triumphant. She just looked at him, with the steady, level gaze of a person who had nothing to prove and knew it. Ryan looked back at the table. Hatch said, "Our client is prepared to offer." "Before you do," Daniel said. Everyone looked at him. He'd been quiet until now, and the room noticed. "Before you give me a number," Daniel said, looking at Ryan directly, "I want to say something. Not for the record, not for the case, just directly." Grace glanced at him. One sharp look. He met it and held it, and she gave the smallest nod. "Your call." Ryan looked up. "You came to my house," Daniel said. "You stood in my driveway. You tried my back gate. You used my daughter. You used the fact that I'm raising her alone as evidence that I wasn't worth the contract, that I wasn't reliable, that I was," he stopped, "controlled. You've known me for 6 years. You know what I've built. You know what it cost. And you still looked at my life and decided it was weakness you could use." Ryan said nothing. "I'm not angry at you for trying to win," Daniel said. "I understand that. I'm telling you that you got it wrong. Not just strategically. Fundamentally." He paused once. "The thing you looked at and called a liability? That's the reason everything you built this week failed. Because the people, you didn't count my daughter, my neighbor, they're the reason you're sitting here instead of me." The room held that. Ryan's face was doing something complicated. Not remorse, necessarily. Not yet. But something, a fracture in the surface of the certainty that had driven him to do what he'd done. The first crack in the wall of a man who had been so sure he understood what other people's lives added up to. Hatch cleared his throat. "Our client is prepared to offer full restitution of the attempted transfers, a formal retraction of any communications made to Colebrook Distribution, and a settlement figure of minus." Grace held up one finger. Just one. And something in the angle of it made Hatch stop. "Full restitution," she said. "Documented retraction to Colebrook. Settlement at the figure we sent you Friday, not $1 less. A written acknowledgement of the mail tampering submitted to the postal inspector's file, not resolved, not dismissed, but acknowledged. And a signed non-disparagement agreement that specifically names my client's personal circumstances as protected content, meaning that if Mr. Mitchell references Daniel Carter's status as a single father in any professional context in a disparaging manner, ever, the settlement is void and we reopen." She looked at Hatch. "And I'd like it in writing by 3 o'clock today." Silence. Hatch looked at Ryan. Ryan was looking at Daniel. And Daniel looked back at him. Not with satisfaction, not with vindication, but with something quieter and more permanent. The look of a man who no longer needed the other person to understand, because the understanding had already happened where it mattered. "We'll have it to you by 2:30, Hatch said. Grace closed her briefcase. 2:15, she said, and stood up. They were out of the building by 11:38. On the sidewalk, Grace shook Daniel's hand and then Madison's, said "Well done," which was, from Grace Park, the equivalent of a standing ovation, and walked to her car without looking back. Daniel and Madison stood on the sidewalk, outside the building. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Madison said, "The non-disparagement clause." "Grace's idea," Daniel said. "But yes, you made sure he can never use Emma against anyone again," she said. "I tried," he said. She looked at him. Something in her expression that he was getting better at reading, not surprised, not moved to sentimentality, but genuinely and specifically pleased. The kind of please that comes from watching someone do the thing they were actually capable of all along. "You did more than try," she said. He nodded. They walked to the car. And in the car, heading back through the ordinary mid-morning traffic of an Ohio Monday, something settled between them that didn't need words yet. The kind of settled that comes after something is finished, truly finished, not postponed, and the space left behind is clean. Grace's email arrived at 2:11. All terms accepted. Signed documents attached. Postal inspector file, updated with Mitchell's acknowledgement. "It's done, Daniel. Congratulations." He read it at his desk and sat very still for a moment. Then he called his mother. "It's done," Carol said. "Good." A pause. "Come to dinner Sunday, both of you." He blinked. "Both of us." "You and Madison," she said. Emma already asked her. She called her this morning. He put his hand over his eyes. Emma called her this morning. At 7:45, apparently, Carol said, cheerfully, before school. She said she wanted to make sure Madison knew she was invited. She said she was worried you'd forget to ask. A pause. "Were you going to forget to ask?" "I was going to ask," he said. "In my own time." Emma didn't want to risk it, Carol said. "Smart girl." He lowered his hand, looked at the ceiling, thought about his 8-year-old daughter at 7:45 in the morning on a Monday, phone in hand, calling the woman next door to make sure the invitation was secure. Thought about 8 months of texts about Gerald the caterpillar. Thought about the story she'd written in language arts about a neighbor who bakes bread and saves the day. His daughter had understood this before he had. His daughter had been managing this situation quietly and with great efficiency for considerably longer than he'd realized. "Sunday," he said. "Fine, I'll make the pot roast," Carol said. "Tell Madison she can bring something if she wants, but she absolutely doesn't have to." "She'll bring something," Daniel said. "I know," Carol said. "That's why I said it." He hung up and called Madison. She answered on the second ring. "Your daughter called me at 7:45, she said, without preamble. "I heard," he said. "She's very organized. She's 8 going on 45, he said. "She invited me to Sunday dinner," Madison said. "I was going to ask you," he said. "Were you?" she said, and there was something in her voice, warmth, and something that might have been teasing, and the particular tone of a woman who is enjoying the fact that she already knows the answer. "I was," he said. "In my own time." "Emma didn't want to risk it," Madison said. "Everyone keeps saying that," he said. She laughed. He heard it clearly, through the phone, real and unguarded and warm, and it landed in him that things land when you've been waiting for them. Without knowing, you were waiting. "Sunday," she said. "What time?" 2 o'clock, he said. "My mother says, bring something if you want, but you don't have to." "I'll bring bread," she said. "The seeded kind?" "The seeded kind," she confirmed. "Perfect," he said. He hung up. He sat at his desk in the quiet of his office and he thought about the shape of the week from midnight on a driveway with a suitcase and a warning he didn't understand, to a conference room with a signed settlement and a non-disparagement clause, to a Sunday dinner that a third grader had organized before 8 in the morning. He thought about how much of it had happened because a woman with a side door had been awake when she didn't have to be. He thought about what he'd almost lost, not just the contract, not just the money, but the version of himself that was beginning, slowly and imperfectly, to come back. He thought about Ryan Mitchell, in that conference room, looking at Madison, trying to locate the gap in his plan. He thought about the gap. 12 feet of yard between 2 houses and 4 years of waves from driveways. That was the gap. Not a weakness, not a liability. The exact opposite. He went back to work. But it was different now. The way work is different when it's in proportion. When it's the thing you do because you're good at it, and it matters, not the thing you do because it's safer than everything else. Sunday came on slowly, the way Sundays do in October, when the light has that particular amber quality and the air is cold enough to mean it. He drove to his mother's place with Emma in the passenger seat. Emma, who had spent the 20-minute drive providing him with a comprehensive briefing on what she'd told Madison to expect from the meal, what topics she had pre-approved for dinner conversation, and what she considered the acceptable ratio of adult talking to everyone talking. What is the acceptable ratio, he asked, because he was curious and also slightly afraid of the answer. 60-40, Emma said. Adult to everyone. But if it goes above 70-30, I'm going to start asking questions. What kind of questions? Strategic ones, she said. He looked at the road. Emma, he said. Yeah, you've been managing this situation for a while, haven't you? It was not really a question. She heard that. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You were sad, Dad, after Mom left. You did all the right things, and you were still sad, and nobody was helping you with it. She paused. Madison was there. She was already there. I just thought someone should make sure you both knew. He kept his eyes on the road. His jaw was tight, not with grief, with the specific emotion of being known, being seen clearly and honestly by a person who loves you, which is one of the most disorienting things that can happen to a man who has spent years building himself to be opaque. You could have told me, he said. You weren't ready, she said. He thought about his mother, saying the same thing. He thought about how the two people who knew him best had been watching him not be ready, and had been patient, and had waited. I'm ready now, he said. I know, she said. That's why I called her at 7:45. He pressed his lips together. He did not trust his voice for a moment. When he had it back, he said, You're the best person I know. Emma Carter. She considered this with appropriate solemnity. I know, she said. You tell me that a lot. I don't tell you enough, he said. She looked at him. And something in her face, something young and real and completely unguarded, opened up for just a second, the way 8-year-old faces do when they get the thing they needed and weren't sure they were going to get. Okay, she said. Soft. Not the efficient okay, the other one. He reached over and squeezed her hand once. She let him. Madison arrived at his mother's house at 2:03, which Emma announced from her post at the front window, like an air traffic controller confirming a landing. She was carrying a cloth bag with the seeded bread and what turned out to be a container of honey butter and a small jar of apple preserves that she'd made herself. And Carol Carter took one look at the jar and said, You made these? And Madison said, Last week from the orchard on Route 9. And Carol said, We're going to get along very well in the decisive way. Carol said things when she had already made up her mind and was simply informing the room. Dinner was the pot roast. It was the pot roast the way Daniel remembered it, from childhood, slow and rich, and the kind of thing that makes a whole house smell like safety. Emma had appointed herself assistant and was deeply involved in the bread slicing operation under Madison's supervision, taking the responsibility with the gravity of a surgeon, tongue slightly between her teeth, making each cut with great deliberation. They ate at Carol's big oak table, all four of them, and the conversation moved the way good conversation moves, not in a straight line but in the organic, overlapping way of people who are comfortable with each other, where one thing leads to another without anyone steering. Carol told a story about Daniel at 11, convinced he could build a go-kart from scratch, the wreckage of which she claimed was still partly visible behind the garage. Daniel denied this. Emma demanded confirmation and received it with gleeful delight. Madison told a story about her first attempt at sourdough that had apparently achieved a density comparable to concrete, and which she had, in a fit of either honesty or despair, actually tested for structural integrity. Did it pass? Emma asked, completely serious. It held up a stack of 4 cookbooks for 6 months, Madison said. That's impressive, Emma said. It was a very bad bread, Madison said. But a great building material, Emma said. Exactly, Madison said. Daniel looked around the table at these 3 people, his mother, his daughter, this woman he'd been waving at from driveways for 4 years, and he felt something happen in him that he hadn't been expecting. Not a small thing. A large thing, quiet and enormous at the same time. The way large things are when they arrive not as explosions but as recognitions. The recognition of belonging. Of being in a room that was not a performance, and not a managed presentation of adequacies but simply real. Simply his. He had not felt this since before the divorce. He had not felt this since before the years of running a tight ship alone and calling it success. He had not known, until this moment, exactly how much he had missed it. Carol caught him looking, and she smiled at him across the table, just a small, private smile, mother to son, the kind that doesn't need any context, and he nodded once. And that was enough. After dinner, Emma disappeared to the living room with a book and the blanket she kept at her grandmother's, the one she'd had since she was 4, and Carol shooed Daniel and Madison into the kitchen to deal with the dishes while she said, was going to supervise Emma's reading, which meant she was going to sit next to her on the couch and sleep, which was what she always did, and everyone knew it. The kitchen was quiet. He washed. She dried. The rhythm of it easy and unhurried. She said, after a few minutes, "Your mother is wonderful." "She is," he said. "She's also been waiting for something like this for about 2 years." "Something like what?" "This," he said. "All of it." Me being he stopped, tried again. Being present, actually here, instead of just going through the motions. She put down the dish she was drying and turned to look at him. "Is that what tonight feels like?" she said. "Actually here?" He looked at her. "Yes," he said, "for the first time in a long time." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Can I tell you something?" "Yes," he said. She looked at the dish towel in her hands. "The night Emma knocked on my door," she said. I almost didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to, but because she paused. I'd gotten good at staying inside, keeping the kitchen light on but not opening the door. Doing everything that looks like being present without actually letting anyone past the entry. He didn't say anything. He waited. "She knocked 3 times, Madison said. And I stood there for a second, and I thought I could pretend I didn't hear it. And then I thought no. Some things you don't get to pretend." She looked up at him. So I answered. He put down the pan he was washing. He was looking at her. "Madison," he said. "I know," she said softly. "No," he said. "I want to say it." He turned toward her fully. "I've spent 4 years being your neighbor. I've spent 4 years not knowing you. And I'm standing here tonight in my mother's kitchen, thinking about what my life looked like 2 weeks ago and what it looks like right now. And the difference is you. Not the fraud case. Not the contract you." He paused. "You answered the door. For Emma. For me. Even when you'd gotten comfortable not answering." He held her gaze. "That's not a small thing, Madison. That's the whole thing." She looked at him. She was holding the dish towel in both hands, and she was looking at him with an expression that was undefended and real, and slightly terrified in the way that real things are terrifying, not because they're dangerous, but because they matter. "I'm out of practice," she said. "Letting things matter." "So am I," he said. "We'll figure it out." She looked at him for one more moment. Then she reached out and put the dish towel on the counter, and she said, "Okay." And that word she'd said 3 times now, in 3 completely different registers, landed this time like a door opening. Not the polite okay or the efficient okay or the soft one. This one was an arrival. This one was a decision. He reached out and took her hand. She let him. They stood in his mother's kitchen, holding hands over a sink full of dishwater, and neither of them said anything, and neither of them needed to. From the living room came the sound of Carol's gentle snoring and Emma's voice reading aloud to herself, the particular quiet murmur of a child working through a story, and the clock on the kitchen wall ticked, and outside the October light was going golden dark the way it does at the end of a Sunday when the weekend is full and the week ahead seems, for once, manageable. Weeks passed. Not quickly and not slowly. In the real way time passes when you're paying attention to it, full and specific, and marked by things worth marking. The settlement documents cleared. Grace called on a Wednesday to say the postal inspector had formally charged Ryan Mitchell with mail tampering, and that the federal process would move on its own timeline now, independent of the civil case. She said it, with the satisfaction of a woman who had been doing this for 20 years and still found genuine pleasure in watching a well-constructed case arrive at its conclusion. Daniel said, "Thank you." Grace said, "You did the hard part. You came home." He thought about that for a long time. He came home. That was the whole thing, in the end. He came home at midnight with a suitcase and an instinct that something was wrong, and someone one night standing in the dark who had been paying attention. And the combination of those two facts had changed everything. Not dramatically, not in the way of movies where the music swells and the credits roll right when the mess is cleaned up. In the real way, the way where things change slowly and keep changing, each day adding something small that compounds into something enormous over time. Emma went back to school. She wrote 2 more stories in language arts, one about a logistics manager who was also a secret architecture enthusiast, and one about a woman who turned bad bread into a better bakery. Her teacher sent a note home, saying she had a remarkable narrative instinct for her age. Daniel put the note on the refrigerator. Madison saw it the next time she was over for dinner, which was Tuesday, because Tuesday had become the unofficial dinner night. A thing that had happened organically over 3 weeks without anyone announcing it, and she read it and didn't say anything for a moment. And then she said, "She's going to be a writer. She's going to be whatever she decides," Daniel said. "She's going to be a writer," Madison said. Certain. Emma, who was in the kitchen and had heard this, did not deny it. The good pasta got made on a Sunday in November, when Emma was at a birthday party, and Madison came over not because of a crisis, and not because of a dinner plan, but simply because she wanted to. And Daniel had the pasta and the sauce going, and she tasted it, and adjusted the garlic, and told him he'd undercooked it by 2 minutes, and he cooked it 2 more minutes, and it was, genuinely, the best pasta he'd ever made. They ate it at the kitchen table, his kitchen table, the one where he'd eaten cold lasagna alone in the middle of the night, what felt like a lifetime ago, and the table didn't feel like a place where a man sat alone and managed his solitude. It felt like what a table is supposed to feel like. He told her that. She looked at him with those steady eyes and said, "It was always supposed to feel like this. You just needed someone to sit down." The fence between their properties, the low wooden thing that had been the polite architectural expression of 12 feet of uncrossed yard, came down on a Saturday in November, not dramatically, but because Emma had been lobbying for it for 2 weeks on the grounds that she wanted to be able to go next door without going around front, and Daniel and Madison had both agreed, independently and without consulting each other, that she was right. And when he mentioned to Madison that he was thinking about taking it down, she said, "I was going to suggest that next week." They took it down together. Emma supervised. Carol brought coffee. It took 45 minutes. The yard looked different without it. More honest somehow, like 2 halves of a thing that had always belonged together and had simply needed someone to notice. The night he came home from his second business trip after all of it, a 2-day run to Cincinnati for a Colebrook logistics walkthrough, kind of professional engagement, that now felt like evidence of something earned rather than something precarious. He turned onto Maplewood Drive and pulled into his driveway and cut the engine, and sat there for a moment the way he always did. He looked at his house. The hallway light was on. Timer. He'd reset it properly. The kitchen light was on too. And through the window, he could see movement: Emma at the kitchen table, doing homework, and Madison at the stove, and the warm yellow light of the kitchen, spilling out into the driveway, and something in him went completely still. Not frozen. Still in the way that a compass goes still when it finds north. The particular stillness of a man recognizing exactly where he is. He got out of the car. He went to the front door. He opened it. And Emma looked up from her homework and said, "Dad's home," in the matter-of-fact tone of someone confirming a scheduled arrival. And Madison turned from the stove and said, "Good timing. 10 minutes." And the house smelled like garlic and the good kind of warmth and something sweet coming from the oven. And his suitcase was in his hand, and his jacket was cold from the outside air, and the whole thing, all of it, the whole impossible, ordinary, beautiful whole of it hit him at once. He put the suitcase down. "Good trip?" Madison said. "Good trip," he said. Emma said, "Did you bring anything back?" Emma, Madison said. I'm just asking, Emma said, reasonable. Yes, Daniel said, in the front pocket of the bag. Don't shake it. Emma was already off her chair. He walked into the kitchen. He looked at Madison at the stove, really looked, the way he'd learned to look, paying attention to the actual thing instead of the peripheral version, and she looked back at him over her shoulder, and something passed between them that was quiet and private and didn't need to be named to be real. What are you making? He said. The pasta, she said. The good kind. You know how to make that? You showed me last month, she said. I improved it. He leaned against the counter next to her. 2 minutes, she said. 2 minutes, he confirmed. I added white wine, she said. Is it better? Try it and tell me. She held out a spoon. He tasted it. It was better. Yes, he said. She turned back to the stove and stirred, and he stayed where he was, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching, in the kitchen that had once been the loneliest room in his house and was now the center of something. Emma came back into the kitchen with a small stuffed animal from the front pocket of his bag, a gray elephant, a twin of the one she'd had since she was 3, that he'd found at an airport gift shop in Cincinnati and bought without deliberating. She held it up. It's like Ellie, she said. Her voice had that quality, the one that tried to be casual and didn't quite manage it. I thought Ellie might want a friend, he said. Emma looked at the elephant. She looked at her dad. She said, in the completely undramatic voice of an 8-year-old, trying very hard to be cool about something that had gotten past her composure. Okay. And then she walked back to the table and sat down and very carefully placed the new elephant next to her homework and went back to her math. But her ear, Daniel noticed, had gone slightly pink, which meant she was not as composed as she wanted everyone to think. He stayed where he was, next to Madison at the stove, and thought about what his life had looked like on a specific Tuesday night 6 weeks ago. He thought about the way he'd constructed the loneliness, not passively, not as a victim of circumstance, but carefully and deliberately, brick by brick, telling himself it was strength when it was actually just fear. Fear that needing people was the same as failing them. Fear that the wall was the only thing holding everything up. He thought about what Madison had said in his mother's kitchen. Some things you don't get to pretend. He thought about what it had taken to stop pretending. Not much, in the end. A little girl who told the truth to a stranger. A woman who answered the door. A man who finally came home and stayed home, not just in the building, but in his own life. It wasn't complicated. It had just taken him a while to see it clearly. Emma asked Madison something about her math problem. Madison looked at it and said, You set it up right. Your multiplication is off by 1 step. Try it again from here. Emma looked, found it, corrected it, and said, with immense dignity, I knew that. Madison said, I know you did. And the kitchen settled back into its warm, working quiet. Daniel looked at his family. Not the family he'd planned. Not the family that had followed the blueprint he'd once imagined for his life. This one unexpected, assembled from a driveway at midnight, and a side door, and a 4-year gap that had finally properly closed. This one. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday evening in December, when the first real snow of the season was coming down over Maplewood Drive, and Emma was asleep upstairs, and the house was quiet and warm, Madison sat across from him at the kitchen table, with her hands around a mug of coffee, and she said, I found something today. When I was cleaning out my storage room at the bakery. He waited. She reached into her coat pocket and placed something on the table between them. It was a photograph. He looked at it. It was the 3 of them, him and Emma and Madison, at a neighborhood picnic back in September. One of those end-of-summer community things where people bring folding chairs and potato salad and spend 2 hours being more neighborly than they usually manage. He didn't remember the photo being taken. In it, Emma was between them, mid-law about something, and Daniel had his hand on her shoulder, and Madison was looking at Emma, with an expression he recognized now, the one she wore when Emma said something that got past her defenses. He looked at it for a long moment. He turned it over. On the back, in Emma's unmistakable handwriting, the determined cursive of a 3rd grader who had practiced it seriously, were 3 words. You found home. He sat very still. He looked at Madison. She was looking at him with steady, clear, undefended eyes. "She gave it to me last week," Madison said quietly. "She asked me to give it to you when it felt like the right time." He looked at the photograph again. He thought about a Tuesday night and a driveway, and 4 words whispered in the dark that had not been a warning but a beginning. He thought about a little girl who had understood, long before either adult had, what was already true. He thought about what it cost to stop pretending, not as much as he'd feared, and more than he'd expected, and worth every bit of it. He put the photograph down on the table between them. He looked at Madison Brooks, this woman who had kept the light on, who had answered the door, who had written 4 pages of careful handwriting and shown up to a conference room and taken down a fence and cooked good pasta and named the right moment without being asked. And he thought, here it is. Not the plan, not the blueprint, the real thing. "It is," he said. "The right time." She nodded. Outside, the snow came down over Maplewood Drive, quiet and steady and without urgency, covering the yard where a fence used to be, blanketing the driveway where it had all begun, settling over a house that had once been the loneliest place a man could be standing and had become, without his fully noticing, the place he was most glad to be. Daniel Carter had come home from a business trip, expecting an ordinary night. He had found, instead, the one thing he had stopped believing he was allowed to have, and this time he was not going to let it go.